All right. This is Think Big for the Verified Testing Team for January 11th, 2021. This is Think Small. Last week we covered Think Big about test coverage and monorepos. We have Daniel and Kyle here joining us to help us talk through this. I put into the agenda a quick recap of last week's Think Big. Our target personas, team leads, directors, etc. They want to be able to organize stuff, files, code, business logic within a monorepo by their team or in some other logical manner, potentially. That's what I got out of our discussion and rewatching it. For them, that solves the problem potentially of being able to block merges in those critical paths and just understand test coverage, code quality, many of the things that we test for today. And this is a differentiator for GitLab because our normal structure of files within the repo can be maintained while teams can have a different view of what they own if we're breaking this out logically. Anything to add to that? Anything that I missed in our discussion last week? All right, great. So then we're going to jump into the Think Small portion of this. So that was our really expansive thinking. Now we're going to really try to constrict Think Down. The goal here is at the end of this, we should be able to create an issue. It may need further iteration, but create an issue that the team can schedule in an upcoming milestone so that we can start to make tangible progress towards that really big vision and help Daniel and his folks get a sense of code coverage or test coverage for their team. So jumping in, we'll start with what can we do in the next milestone to test out this idea, see if there's legs here and get us moving. Ricky, do you want to verbalize your point there?
Yeah, I recall having talked about this in a Slack thread, which I have now lost, about using code owners for this kind of separation. I know that code owners are the thing that we have right now that associates a file with a given GitLab user. So that's something that exists already that's kind of in this direction. I'm not sure what everyone's thoughts are on that.
So that would be taking. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I brought up that idea in the Slack thread. I recall, and it was essentially just using code owners as a way to indicate that ownership and then filter everything down by the using group code ownership. So you would say like testing owns all of these components and then be able to filter the coverage reports down based on that group ownership. I think was the idea. I'll see if I can hunt down the Slack thread.
Do we have group ownership?
We can if the group is a member of the project. So when we had experimented with this before, we found like engineering productivity wasn't actually listed as an owner, but once they were added as a member, everything seemed to sync up in the UI and
okay.
everywhere else.
Right. Yeah, I see like docs team in here and stuff. Like there's a way to do that. Okay, cool. I'm just thinking that as I'm wondering about code owners that I don't think I'm a code owner anywhere. So I don't know how I would interact, how that would interact with me and how I would, like while I'm working, how I'd connect to that. Or is this, sorry, did I miss the persona we're talking about here? Am I off base?
I was about to say, that's great, Drew, but we don't care about you in this case.
I realized that I was talking. I was like, I might not matter at all.
You matter, just great. Not for this use case in particular.
Perfect.
I'm thinking about team lead or VP and thinking about my team owns this chunk of code. Using code owners could be a way forward for us. Dan, you have a concern though, if you want to vocalize that for us.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the impact of conflating the two, of code ownership and group membership. Because currently, I mean, and I forgive my ignorance, I think is probably the good description here, being polite to myself. I'm not sure of generally speaking, people in teams around even code they kind of air quote own, because we don't really own code at GitLab, right? Are actually members of the code owners group anyway. And I wonder what the impact that would be. I wonder what impact that would have, especially when we have open source and we're asking people to contribute everywhere and all of those sorts of things. So,
is there a way to do like code attribution to a collection of like a team, for example, in any other way? And I sorry, I'm not saying that to like be combative. It's more, I really have no idea. So this was like the default thing that came to mind.
I don't think I've ever talked to you when you've been combative, Kyle. So that was not my assumption with the question you asked.
Okay.
I don't know of any other way to do it.
Yeah.
When I was thinking about this, I kept coming back to the idea of, wouldn't it be cool if there was a concept of a team within a project on GitLab, like the app, like if there was like a team section that you could go and manage separate from groups. But I think that's just, it's just like it's a group. You can use a group to do that already. And then, so how do you associate generic user entity on GitLab with a line of code? And like Kyle pointed out, I think the only way that we do that right now is with code owners. So we would have to build something new or repurpose code owners, unless there's something that I don't know, which is very, I don't know a lot of.
So
Drew, you had a comment. Drew took the time to actually write something down here a little while ago.
Yeah, I was thinking about this as something we could potentially do in a single milestone, is just configure this for like one segment, for a couple people who fit the persona we're looking for, to make sure that the result is usable the way we think it's going to be. Is that something that's worth sort of prototyping, I guess, like putting it to a few targeted people and saying, do you want this? Like, are you using this the way we think you are?
could we go even smaller than that and just do a query of, for Dan, here's the files that you're a code owner for, here's the chunks out of a Cobertura report that they align with, so you can get your data more easily, and see if just that data drop would give him what he wants.
Just like kind of, here's the code owners, here's the Cobertura report, here's the cross product of your slice of that Cobertura report with all the stats that are stored in the per file node of that report.
Yeah, just if I'm thinking back correctly from the original Slack thread, the question was about, I want to see what test coverage is for my group and the code that generally that we're working on within package. Can we use those two bits of data to pull that together?
So, sorry. The other thing is the feature categorization effort from scalability. Like, that's a thing where they're attributing controllers and workers to a specific feature, and then those features are then attributed to a specific team within the code through like metaprogramming. I don't know if that's another thing that isn't code owners that might work.
Yeah, I think with that you still have to figure out mapping to. I don't know if there's like, because that's sort of more like service level ownership, I think. Maybe I just am getting that wrong. I don't think that's at that level to give us a full like report on what the code is.
Yeah, it's like they're using it right now to generate dashboards for each team based on the features that they've added that in. So like the Verify testing team has its own dashboard that incorporates the controllers and services that are meta programmed or labeled with that feature category Rails.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, if that actually has a level of detail you all need, that's probably a really good way to start. I would probably suggest EM use case would be better than senior EM or director, but I think they'd probably be more impactful. Otherwise, I don't know, this is my opinion, obviously, I have those, but you know, then it's senior EM going, hey, coverage is not good enough, teams, you know, instead of the EM sort of being, I even want everyone to be able to look at it and make sense of it. So I would probably go most smallest unit, because we're talking about team coverage reports. So I would go team level rather than senior, like sort of combined team level, because then you still have to sort of break it down. Does that make sense? Like I don't think I'm the best use case for the first smallest thing that we could do.
So maybe testing is even, we could look at the data for map it up to code owners. Sorry, random train of thought is totally being derailed. Take the code owners, look at the files that we touch or that we belong to for code owners, and parse the data out. That could be a next thing for us to try. Okay.
Where's the? Oh, okay. I'm trying to figure out where we are in the notes. I'm trying to make sure.
I think we're in about 3 different places in the notes right now.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, I think we should go back up to Drew's.
Yeah.
Up here, and then we'll go to the bottom.
Right. So yeah. So my thing was specifically about what's the smallest like prototype product we can produce to say, hey, is this end result useful, independent of how we decide to slice up the report and how we attribute things. Like there's a methodology that will change what's in that report, but then there's also like that report itself to say like, is this the way you want things presented to you?
So what is that report? What would that look like? Because there's a bunch of different things that we can do. There's already an HTML report that gets generated by RSpec that takes like, I don't know, 5 minutes to load up in Chrome that has all of the files in it. Yeah. You can generate one of those that's smaller, and then we have an HTML page you can look at. Alternatively, we could just spit out some metrics into a metrics report, or we could spit out an artifact with some JSON in it. Like, what's the how is this going to be consumed?
We grep for group names and create a bunch of smaller files.
Like we could even just, I don't know. There's a lot that could be done. That's what I will say.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, is that, do we still want to test an end product because we're not sure what the end product might look like? Okay.
So yeah. And I'll go back to, I think our end product, at least for Dan, was I want to see how the team is doing. And if we scope that down to an EM, I think we could take package or verify testing and say, for code that we're code owners of, just how is coverage trending over time? Or what is coverage even today? Just show me what it is. And maybe we can generate a report this week and another report next week and just say, how is it trended in the default branch?
Where are we wanting this report? Are we wanting on the project level or the group level?
I think project, because we're talking about the project code coverage.
Yeah.
So like if this matters, what I was thinking is almost like in the UI, you could just see a chart of code coverage over time and pick in a dropdown which group we're talking about in the code owners. So starting with the HTML reports you're talking about is definitely a good start, but I think what seems to be And that's the like tangible thing in my mind. I want to see what this group's or this team's code coverage is over time. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
So we have the repository analytics in the project already with the code coverage statistics.
Mhm.
That one has the drop down for the different tests, right? We could have like another drop down in that same chart that just lets you choose the group or the code owner. That's any of the code owners that's listed in the code owners file.
From a back-end perspective, I think that makes things a bit complicated. But Kyle, what was your suggestion before I jump in there?
It doesn't apply. I was just saying a starting point. So like if you're looking for a team that already has code owner attribution, there's some teams that are already listed that look like would they be good fits.
Ricky, do you have a link to the? I was trying to find the attribution that you were talking about earlier for the features, because that like
yeah.
I'm just not sure. I still am kind of not convinced that code owners is the way to do it. It might be the way to do it in like the really short term to go, here's the thing, let's see what it looks like to see the output. And I appreciate like get moving and get something done. But I worry if we go down that path, then we go through the excitement of having to deal with code owners all over again. We did that in the handbook once when we sort of implemented code owners, and it can be really difficult as people come and join teams and all this sort of stuff. So instead of just being sort of a YAML file or whatever that we do for the feature attribution, it ends up being like a big change process because it's code owners and it does involve some permissions and stuff like that. So I wonder whether this is not a great path to go down.
Yeah, I threw the Epic link that seems to be the most relevant in there for the marking up the code with that feature categorization. As far as code owners goes, I understand why that's a big problem in the www repo, because it does have, like you said, permissions aspects and only these people can merge it and stuff like that. But I don't think we're using it that way on the GitLab repo. I'm not sure about that though. And I'm like, honest question, what would happen if we just started slamming a bunch of group names into the code owners file? Like what would happen if this one file has 5 group names on it because it's the merge request controller and all these groups share responsibility for it? Like if hypothetically, if we went through this process and just for testing, or like Kyle said, composition analysis or container security, have already done that. But if we did that just for testing, we went through all the places that we care about and we put our group tag, so like at GitLab org verify testing in there, like what would be the impact on the UI? What would be the impact on our pipelines? What would be the impact on merge requests?
Yeah, it's a good question. It seems like something we could test out pretty easily.
Yeah, I have some hypothesis, but I think just test it out. There shouldn't be any required approvals that are generated in the GitLab repo, unless I'm misunderstanding things. There will be listed code owner approvals in the merge request approval widget. Those are the things that come to mind. I'm not sure if Drew or Scott, you've encountered anything that is different than that, as you've done more MRs than me, probably.
For instance, we have in there a front end code owner kind of thing. So it has all the front end files, SCSS, JS. And so when you make an edit in an MR to a front end file, it'll, I think, the danger bot or whatever suggests the reviewer roulette suggests a front end person. I think it's just a suggestion and it's a bot. So I don't know how
let's maybe take it
would like affect it.
Let me ask the team. Like I can ask engineering productivity. I think it's a valid question. Dan, your perspective's spot on. Like if we conflate code owners to be more than just what someone who's a user would think of code owners as, we should maybe stop and think before going down it. So I'll take the action to just run it by engineering productivity and see what the impacts would be.
And then, yeah, the alternative that I was thinking about is adding another configuration, right? Like making something new. That seems to be the other thing. And I'm not sure that the feature categorization is going to make sense. It may, but that might even be like a next iteration, because that allows you to be granular down to the method level. So you're actually adding specific methods into that feature categorization, so you could get even more fine grain association. But if we just had a JSON file where you nested a bunch of files with you say group testing, and then had a bunch of files listed, and then when we're processing that cobertura report, we just grab those files, make a number, put it in the database. That's something that might be possible. The problem is then if we have 50 teams who all care about 6,000 files, then we're sitting at the end of that report parsing for.
Cool. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I think we've been touching on some of the hardest and riskiest parts of this already, though. But I just want to circle back from that think small perspective. Are we narrowed down to getting some commitment to what does the outcome look like? What does that report look like? Is it helpful for our EM persona? Is that our next step in the issue that we should create for the team to tackle? See lots of thinking, so I'm thinking no.
I mean, I don't know whenever we have any other action items out of this. Apparently, I can't talk this morning. Sorry. I should probably try to repeat that so it was audible and understandable. I don't know what other action items we'd take, but to test that out.
All right.
If we take the action of cutting down the report we have to a smaller report based on some criteria, is it useful for us to look at a smaller version of exactly what we have today, or do we want to think about a new view? Is that something that like we could do in the next milestone and just say, does this become actionable when we make it smaller? Because I think that's something we could validate at least as a one-off.
Yeah.
With relatively low overhead, right? We know how to produce a smaller version of exactly what we have. I think we could validate that in one milestone.
That's the iteration
that's something we want to look at.
Yeah.
So are you, which report are you talking about? The repository analytics report or the HTML RSpec coverage file?
Probably. So I was thinking of the HTML, like the artifact, because an artifact is easier for us to directly manipulate. Like it's one engineer can pull that file down and slice it up and then show the smaller version to an EM and say, is this good? Like thumbs up or down. That's a very, like, that seems like a very small and encapsulated thing we could do to get feedback from the person that we think is going to like this.
So for that, like you could just generate that by knowing what files you care about in terms of coverage, and then just running those RSpec tests.
Yeah.
So you could probably do that locally if you had that list of files that your team cared about. You could generate that artifact locally and then show it. But then the challenge is
that seems like a
test file
schedulable
finder to use test file finder to do a thing, generate the coverage report.
Yeah, that seems like a tractable issue.
I think it
like
still
that.
relies on people creating up. We need the mapping. We need the list of files to to the team, or we need at least a list of files that someone cares about.
We could do it for ourselves. We know what files we work in. We could make Dan Croft give us a list of files because he's here in the meeting. We have him trapped.
I think we could generate it for testing and then show the output to Dan or another EM and say, would this be helpful? Because what we want to see is okay, bye Dan, is the outcome, if it was applicable data, going to get you what you need? And if not, then we can iterate on what that outcome is, at least for the small version of it. And then we can find a happy path or a non-code owner's way to get that data, or a better way to map the data if we think the outcome is right. But I wouldn't want to spend a bunch of time figuring out how to get the data if we don't know that the report's actually helpful. Cool. So I think we're going to generate some sort of report for testing data, for testing features, verified testing features, to show code coverage or test coverage for what we care about. We'll socialize that report with a couple of EMs to get feedback on, is this helpful? If not, why? Or how could we make this data actionable for you and your team? And we can iterate from there on actually bringing that artifact into the UI and figuring out that risky and hard part of how do we actually do this mapping with what we have, or what is the new mechanism to create this mapping? Does that sound like the right next steps in an iterative plan? At least based on
I like the idea of validating the solution first, and then we can work backwards on how do we get there. So if we can come up with what people actually expect and want from this feature first, then we can go and figure out how to do it. That strikes me of a much more iterative and kind of GitLab way of doing something than just trying to start building it.
Right. Yeah. Let's punt on the extensibility part. Cool. And say, let's forget about that until we know we want to extend it.
Looks like that is our Think Small, and is in Think Small font in the agenda too, for those who can't see it. Oh, there it goes. All right.
I know that it was a superscript, I think. Someone put it as superscript accidentally. I was like, that's not a font size problem. I know we're really at time, but I did want to point out really quickly on the category mapping that Ricky mentioned. I already wrote this out so no one has to take notes. That mapping to controllers and whatnot's already done. And then the mapping done from controllers and whatnot to product categories is already done. And then the product categories are already mapped to groups. So that's the single source of truth. So whatever we're doing right now, and I think this seems like a good plan to figure out what the report would look like. It makes total sense to me. But I think whatever we do going forward, I would argue that that is the single source of truth of team construction and members of team, rather than then having a separate group membership that has to be updated independently, which lives in GitLab, although we do that actually pretty well because we use that all the time. But I think I could be convinced that the actual group membership for the groups in GitLab is totally a single source of truth as well. Maybe we just have two. So
yeah, I think this is what I'm thinking here is like what is someone else going to want? Like not GitLab, like what is some customer going to want when they look at that? Are they going to want to have our whole YAML situation built out, or are they going to want a code owners file that they can add people to GitLab groups in? And so I think it's important to keep that in mind.
All right. Well, we'll take the next step of getting that report created and do the socialization. And I can take a step of validating this problem and that solution is going to work for customers out in the real world too. Awesome. Thanks everybody for the great discussion. Appreciate it. And
thanks.
Go upvote the next topic for our Think Big in a couple of weeks. All right,
awesome.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Dan.